I'm saying? If that 808, if you want it to sound like, you know, crumpled up and garbage and distorted and crazy, then fine. That's perfect. But other than that, just don't distort everything that you send to us. That's all.
Awesome.
I got one on level, on levels too. So like, and what I'll just say is like in the top 3/4. I mean, you know, it turns yellow to green in that areas where you want it. You don't want it down. Super low is terrible too. That's just as bad as having it too hot, because then for us to turn it up and get it into a nominal level where we can work with it, we're adding a ton of noise, and then the mix gets noisier. It's not clean anymore. The biggest problem I got with producer tracks is that they print the mix like they did the rough mix. Like they print the track out the same way they did the rough mix, which means if they don't like this sound, like they got a really small, like a little sound that's supposed to be a background sound, so they keep it really low. Then when they print it where they got it turned down for the mix, and then it ends up being really down here. And then when I turn it up so I can work with it, it's really noisy. What a producer should do when you're tracking out a beat to send it off to somebody, this is any producer, you should have your session basically that you created your 2-track mix in. That's going to be all your different levels of faders and all that stuff that you did your bounce out. That's fine. Save that. Save another copy called track out version. Put all your faders at 0, and then bounce everything out that way. Now you're not going to have any distorted ones. You're not going to have any too low. Everything's going to be at a 0 level, which is where the mix engineer wants it anyway. We don't care what levels you had it when you did the mix. You're like your 2-track rough mix. We're going to be able to hear that from the reference track that you send us. So we'll listen to that and we can make our adjustments. But for us to get our signal noise ratios correct, to make sure we're not generating too much noise or overloading the console or anything else we're doing, we need all those levels to be consistent across it, not in the red and not down buried in the bottom, right? So that's really important on our end. I mean, I spend first 30 minutes of a session, most every session, having to fix all of those levels to get everything nominal where I could even work on it. It's a completely different pattern than like what people, when they do rough mixes at the house, what we do here. So if you want your mixes to be top notch, you need to supply us again with like all the levels and stuff where we kind of need them. Like I said, we can, off the 2-track, we'll get the references where you wanted the strings, where you wanted the horns, where you wanted the snare. All that stuff we get off of the reference. We don't need you to actually print it that way, because that just makes it harder on us to actually get everything where we need it.
So once the mix is actually done and you guys have, the client seems to be happy with it, are they then listening to it outside of the studio? Do they listen to it on headphones? I hear a lot of times people run back to their car to listen to their mixes.
I mean, I would recommend that they listen on as many different platforms as possible, just because, you know, I look at music like it should never be a rush. You should never just be in a rush to put something out. You should live with your music to be able to say, okay, I like the way this sounds in the car, but it sounded kind of weird on my home stereo. How can we tweak this? How can we adjust it? I'm always a fan of really trying to make sure that it's consistent. And one thing about mixing in a studio like this, top-notch professional studio, is that these rooms are built so that the way you hear it in the room is accurate. It's how it's going to translate to the car and translate to the club, to the radio. But I still would recommend that you live with the mix, because I mean there might be subtleties that you might not necessarily think of at the time in the room that you might want to end up tweaking later. So that's just my personal opinion about it.